My name is Eileen. I'm 58 years old, and 3 years ago, I inherited $43 million when my husband Thomas passed away. When my daughter Jessica got engaged to Brian, I decided to keep my wealth a secret during their wedding planning. I wanted to make sure Brian loved my daughter for who she was, not for what she might inherit. If you're watching this from a comfortable chair in your living room or during your lunch break, hit subscribe and like. You'll want to hear what happened after I kept my mouth shut at my daughter's wedding, because trust me, sometimes silence truly is golden. I need to take you back a bit to understand why I made the decision to hide my wealth. Thomas and I were married for 30 wonderful years before he passed away from a sudden heart attack. It was the most devastating moment of my life. One day we were planning our retirement, and the next I was planning his funeral. Thomas and I had built a successful construction business together. While he handled the building side, I managed the office work before transitioning to a career in real estate. Over 3 decades, we expanded from a small local operation to one of the largest construction companies in our state. We worked hard, saved wisely, and invested intelligently. Neither of us came from money, so we appreciated every dollar we earned. When Thomas died, I was shocked to learn the full extent of our wealth. Between life insurance investments, business assets, and property holdings, I inherited $43 million. It was an overwhelming amount that I never expected to have sole control over. Thomas had always been the one to manage our larger investments, while I handled our day-to-day finances. Our daughter Jessica is 28 and works as a kindergarten teacher. Despite growing up with certain privileges, she has always been remarkably down to earth. Thomas and I raised her to understand the value of hard work and to never flaunt wealth. She attended public schools, worked summer jobs, and paid part of her own college tuition. We wanted her to build character and independence rather than relying on family money. Jessica met Brian at a mutual friend's barbecue 2 years ago. Brian works as an architectural engineer at a mid-sized firm. Their connection was immediate, and I could see why. He was thoughtful, intelligent, and seemed to genuinely adore my daughter. They shared similar values and enjoyed simple pleasures: hiking on weekends, cooking dinner together, volunteering at the local animal shelter. Their lifestyle was modest but fulfilling. Brian comes from a middle-class family. His father, Alan, owns a small plumbing business, and his mother, Diane, works as an administrative assistant at the local high school. They live in a pleasant neighborhood across town. Nothing fancy, but certainly comfortable. Brian has one sister, Amanda, who works in pharmaceutical sales. When Brian proposed to Jessica after dating for 1.5 years, we were all delighted. The first time I met his family was at the engagement dinner Brian organized at a local restaurant. The evening started pleasantly enough with toasts and stories from both sides. But as the night progressed, I noticed some subtle comments from Brian's parents that gave me pause. "It must be nice for Jessica to have grown up in that part of town," Alan remarked while discussing our homes. "Those houses must cost a fortune these days." Later, Diane asked pointed questions about Thomas's business and whether Jessica would be taking over the family company someday. There was an undercurrent of curiosity about our financial situation that made me slightly uncomfortable. That night, I made the decision to keep the full extent of my inheritance private. I had already been discreet about my wealth since Thomas's passing, living in the same home, maintaining similar spending habits, driving the same car. Few people outside my closest circle knew about the millions sitting in my investment accounts. I wanted Jessica to be loved and accepted for herself, not seen as a ticket to wealth. Jessica herself expressed a desire for a modest wedding with equal contributions from both families. "Mom, I don't want anything extravagant," she told me. "Brian and I want to start our marriage without either family feeling like they're carrying more weight than the other." I respected her wishes and agreed to match whatever Brian's family could contribute to the wedding without revealing that I could have paid for 100 weddings without blinking an eye. The initial wedding planning meetings with both families were pleasant enough. We gathered around my dining room table with wedding magazines, budget spreadsheets, and lots of excitement. Jessica had a clear vision, a garden ceremony at a local botanical garden, followed by a reception for about 150 guests. Nothing over the top, just elegant and meaningful. "We're thinking about setting the total budget at $50,000, Jessica explained at our first meeting. "If both families contribute $25,000 each, that should cover everything we want without anyone feeling strained." Alan and Diane nodded in agreement, though I noticed Alan's gaze lingering on the crystal chandelier in my dining room. "This is a beautiful home you have, Eileen," he commented. "Thomas must have left you well situated." I smiled politely. We were comfortable, but I still watch my pennies. Thomas was always the financially cautious one between us. A small deflection that wasn't entirely untrue. Thomas had been prudent with our money, which is partly how we built our wealth. As weeks passed and planning progressed, I began to notice a shift in Alan and Diane's behavior. What started as subtle comments evolved into more direct suggestions for upgrading various wedding elements. "You know, for just a few thousand more, we could move the reception to the Grand Hotel downtown," Alan suggested during our third planning meeting. "It would make such a statement." "Jessica loves the botanical garden," I reminded him gently, "and the package they've offered fits perfectly within our agreed budget." Diane chimed in. "But surely you want the best for your only daughter. The botanical garden is lovely, but the Grand Hotel is where the most memorable weddings happen." The pressure continued with other aspects of the wedding. The modest catering package Jessica selected wasn't impressive enough for guests. The DJ she chose wasn't as good as the 10-piece band Alan recommended. The wedding dress Jessica fell in love with at a local boutique wasn't as special as the designer gowns Diane pointed out in magazines. Each suggestion came with the same underlying message: surely I could afford more for my daughter's special day. But Jessica remained firm in her desires, and I supported her choices. Alan became increasingly direct in his probing about my finances. "The construction business must have been quite profitable," he remarked one evening as we reviewed flower arrangements. "Those commercial contracts bring in serious money." "The business had good years and lean years like any other," I responded vaguely. "Thomas was the business mind behind it all." "But you must have inherited his share when he passed," Alan pressed. "Those kinds of assets don't just disappear." I maintained my position that I was comfortable but careful with money, redirecting conversations whenever they veered toward my financial situation. Meanwhile, Jessica was becoming noticeably stressed. After one particularly tense planning session where Alan pushed for a more expensive videographer, she broke down in my kitchen. "Mom, I feel caught in the middle," she confessed, wiping away tears. "Brian's parents keep making these suggestions like money is no object, then looking at you expectantly. Brian gets uncomfortable, I get uncomfortable, and somehow I'm the one who ends up feeling guilty for not wanting to spend more." I hugged her tightly. "Would you like me to contribute more to ease the pressure? I could cover some extras without them knowing." Jessica shook her head firmly. "No, that's not the point. Brian and I want a marriage based on equality and mutual respect. Starting with a wedding where one family outspends the other sets a precedent I'm not comfortable with. I just wish his parents would respect our budget and choices." Things came to a head at a dinner 2 months before the wedding. Alan made a toast, raising his glass with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "To Jessica, who's about to become part of our family. Brian sure knows how to pick 'em. Nothing like marrying into a successful business family, eh, son?" The table fell uncomfortably silent. Brian turned red. Jessica stared at her plate, and I maintained a neutral expression while seething and internally. Later that evening, Brian's sister Amanda made a comment that chilled me. As she helped clear dessert plates, she said to Jessica just loudly enough for me to overhear, It must be nice to have family wealth you can hide behind the scenes. Makes you wonder what else is being kept secret. That night I called my best friend Marjorie, who knew about my inheritance. Maybe I should just tell them the truth, I said. It might stop all this uncomfortable speculation. And then what? Marjorie asked wisely. You think people who are already this focused on money are going to become less interested when they find out there's $43 million in the picture. You'd be painting a target on your back, Eileen. I knew she was right. When Jessica came over the next day looking tired from another disagreement about wedding details, she pleaded with me. Mom, please just go along with things for now. Once the wedding is over, all this planning stress will be behind us. If only it had been that simple. The wedding weekend finally arrived, and I had to admit the botanical garden looked absolutely stunning. White chairs lined the manicured lawn with an arch of roses and lilies, marking the spot where Jessica and Brian would exchange vows. The glass reception pavilion was transformed with twinkling lights, greenery, and subtle floral arrangements, elegant without being ostentatious, exactly as Jessica wanted. As guests began to arrive, I took my role as mother of the bride, seriously greeting everyone with genuine warmth. I couldn't help but notice Brian's extended family seemed particularly interested in the wedding costs. This must have set you back quite a bit, Brian's aunt remarked while eyeing the champagne being served during the cocktail hour. Both families contributed equally, I responded with a pleasant smile. Jessica and Brian were very mindful of the budget. The rehearsal dinner the night before had been at a local Italian restaurant, Jessica's favorite. It was lovely, until Alan, after a few glasses of wine, began loudly speculating about the value of my house. Properties in your neighborhood must be worth, what, $1.5 million these days? $2 million, he asked across the table. That equity alone must give you quite the financial cushion. I deflected gracefully. Real estate values fluctuate so much it's hard to say. How about a toast to the beautiful couple? The wedding day itself dawned perfect and clear. I spent the morning with Jessica in the bridal suite, helping her get ready alongside her bridesmaids. When she put on her dress, the one she had chosen from the local boutique, I was overcome with emotion. You look absolutely beautiful, sweetheart, I said, blinking back tears. Your father would be so proud of the woman you've become. Jessica squeezed my hand. I wish Dad was here to walk me down the aisle. He's here in spirit, I assured her, and I'm honored to take his place today. The ceremony was everything Jessica had hoped for. Walking her down the aisle, I felt Thomas's absence acutely, but also his presence in the strong, independent daughter we had raised together. Jessica and Brian exchanged heartfelt vows. They had written themselves, promising partnership, respect, and lifelong commitment. The reception began joyfully, with delicious food, touching speeches, and plenty of dancing. I was finally starting to relax when Alan clinked his glass for an unscheduled toast. When Brian first told us about Jessica, he mentioned she was a kindergarten teacher. He began smiling broadly. I thought, well, that's nice, but teachers don't exactly bring home the big bucks. Then I found out about her family background, construction business, real estate, and I thought, now that makes more sense. Nervous laughter rippled through the room as Alan continued. To Jessica and Brian, may your marriage build as much wealth as your family businesses. Jessica's face showed controlled composure, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. Brian looked mortified, but said nothing to counter his father's inappropriate toast. Later, during the father-daughter dance, Brian's uncle cornered me near the bar. Thomas's construction business must have had some impressive contracts, he probed. My buddy works in commercial real estate and says those big projects can be worth millions. Did Thomas leave you with stakes in ongoing developments? Thomas left me with wonderful memories and a beautiful daughter, I replied, excusing myself to check on the cake cutting. Throughout the evening, I overheard Amanda telling guests that Jessica probably has trust funds nobody knows about, and speculating about family money being kept under wraps. Each comment reinforced my decision to keep my inheritance private. Despite these undercurrents, the wedding ended beautifully. Jessica and Brian departed amid a shower of rose petals off to their honeymoon in Hawaii, a moderately priced trip they had saved for together. Jessica looked blissfully happy, which was all that mattered to me. Still, I couldn't shake my worry about the dynamics that had been established with her new in-laws and their fixation on money. The week after the wedding, while Jessica and Brian were still in Hawaii, I received an unexpected call from Alan. "Eileen, now that we're family, I wanted to get your input on some investment opportunities I'm considering," he began without preamble. "With your background in real estate and Thomas's business experience, I figured you might have some insights about which sectors are performing well." I was taken aback by his directness. "I'm afraid I'm not qualified to give investment advice, Alan. Thomas handled most of our larger financial decisions." "But surely you've continued managing the assets since his passing," Alan pressed. "Someone with your resources must have a financial advisor or portfolio manager you could put me in touch with." I deflected again, promising to think about it, while inwardly growing more concerned about his fixation on my supposed wealth. When Jessica and Brian returned from their honeymoon, they moved into a modest two-bedroom apartment they had leased together. Brian had insisted they live within their means, rather than accepting any housing assistance from either family, a principle I respected enormously. About 2 weeks after their return, we all gathered for dinner at Brian's parents' house. What I had hoped would be a pleasant family meal quickly turned uncomfortable when Alan began questioning the young couple about their future housing plans. "That apartment is fine for now," he said while passing the potatoes, "but you'll want to buy something soon. Property is the best investment and you don't want to throw money away on rent." "We're saving for a down payment," Brian explained. "Maybe in a year or two." Alan's gaze shifted to me. "I'm sure Eileen could help speed up that timeline. A mother wants to see her daughter settled properly. Right, Eileen?" Jessica shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Dad, Brian and I want to do this ourselves. We've discussed it." "There's nothing wrong with family helping family," Diane chimed in, "especially when some have more resources than others." The pointed comments continued throughout dinner, with increasing references to my presumed financial capacity to help the young couple. Jessica grew quieter as the meal progressed, while Brian looked caught between loyalty to his parents and discomfort with their tactics. A few days later, I visited Jessica at her school. Watching her interact with her kindergarten students, her face estimated as she read them a story, I was filled with motherly pride. But when the children went to recess and we had a moment alone, I noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. "Is everything okay, sweetheart?" I asked gently. Jessica's composure cracked. "Brian's parents won't stop Mom. It's not just at family dinners. They call constantly asking if we've thought about their suggestions, or if we've discussed things with you yet." "What things exactly?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "Money things," Jessica sighed. "Alan offered to make Brian a partner in the plumbing business if we invest family money to expand it. He keeps telling Brian that with Jessica's background, we should be thinking bigger than an apartment and entry-level jobs." She continued, her voice strained. "Diane suggested I should quit teaching since I don't need to work with my background. She actually said teaching was a nice hobby, but now that I'm married, I should focus on starting a family and managing our finances." "What does Brian say about all this?" I asked carefully. "He's caught in the middle," Jessica admitted. "He defends me when they're too direct, tells them we're making our own decisions. But I can tell part of him wonders if I'm hiding something too. There have been enough comments and insinuations that he's started asking questions about Dad's business, and whether there might be some inheritance or trust I haven't told him about." This was exactly what I had feared. money coming between them before they'd even had a chance to establish their marriage. Brian was being pulled between his parents' expectations and his wife's reality. Over the next few weeks, the situation deteriorated further. Amanda Bryan's sister apparently began spreading rumors among their mutual friends that Jessica came from serious money, but was playing middle class for some unknown reason. These rumors eventually got back to Jessica, causing further strain. Brian was increasingly frustrated, caught between his wife and his parents. He began working longer hours, coming home late, sometimes bringing up missed opportunities when they argued. The happy newlyweds were showing cracks in their relationship, and I watched with growing concern, still maintaining my secret, but wondering if my silence was now causing more harm than good. 3 months after the wedding, I received a call that broke my heart. Jessica was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "Mom, can I come over? I need somewhere to go," she managed between tears. 20 minutes later, she was at my door, eyes red and puffy, looking utterly defeated. I guided her to the couch, wrapped her in the throw blanket her father had always used for his Sunday naps, and waited for her to be ready to talk. "We had a huge fight," she finally explained. "Not just Brian and me, but with his parents, too." Alan and Diane had invited them to dinner ostensibly to discuss holiday plans, but once they arrived, it became clear the real agenda was financial. "Alan announced he's expanded his plumbing business," Jessica explained. "Hired 3 new plumbers, leased a larger workspace, bought 2 new service vans. He said he did it in anticipation of our contribution, as if we had promised to invest in his business." When Jessica expressed confusion, Alan had become increasingly agitated. He said they had been patient enough waiting for us to come clean about my family money. He talked about how they had welcomed me with open arms, included me in their family, and expected the same courtesy in return. Jessica had finally had enough. "I told them there was no secret wealth, that you live comfortably from the business proceeds and your real estate work, but there's no vast fortune they're being kept from." Alan and Diane refused to believe her. They had convinced themselves that Thomas must have left millions that I was hoarding family wealth, and that Jessica was complicit in keeping it from Brian. "They accused me of lying to my husband," Jessica said, fresh tears streaming down her face. "Diane said she couldn't understand why I would keep money from my husband unless I was planning an exit strategy from the marriage." The worst part, Jessica told me, was Brian's response. Instead of defending her unequivocally, he had sat in painful silence through most of the accusations. When he finally spoke, it was to ask Jessica directly if there was any truth to his parents' suspicions. "Do your mom and dad have money you haven't told me about?" he had asked. "Because if there is, we should be honest with each other." That single question, after 2 years together, after all they had shared, felt like a betrayal to Jessica. She had left the dinner in tears, telling Brian she needed space, and driven straight to my house. As I held my daughter, I contemplated revealing the truth about my inheritance. It could clear Jessica's name, prove she had never lied to Brian. But it could also make everything infinitely more complicated. "What do you think I should do?" I asked her. "Would it help if they knew the truth about my financial situation?" Jessica looked at me with tired eyes. "If Brian doesn't trust me now, will money fix that? If his parents are this focused on what they think we have, what would they be like if they knew the real amount? It would just validate their behavior." She was right, of course. Revealing my wealth might clear one misunderstanding, but it would create a host of new problems. I respected my daughter's wisdom and agreed to maintain my privacy while supporting her through this crisis. Jessica stayed with me that night. The next morning, Brian called, apologetic and concerned. They agreed to meet and talk things through. While Jessica was still hurt by his momentary doubt, she loved him and believed in their marriage enough to work through it. But as I watched my daughter leave to meet her husband, I made a decision. I needed to understand exactly what we were dealing with when it came to Brian's family. If money was this central to their thinking, there had to be a reason beyond simple greed or curiosity. That afternoon, I called Martin, a private investigator I had worked with occasionally in my real estate days, to perform background checks on potential business partners. I explained the situation and asked him to look into Alan's business finances and personal history. Nothing illegal, Martin, I emphasized. I just need to understand what's motivating this fixation on my supposed wealth. Martin was discreet, thorough, and quick. Within a week, he had compiled a concerning picture of Brian's family finances. Alan's plumbing business was deeply in debt, not from normal business expenses, but from a pattern of expansion, followed by cash flow problems, followed by high-interest loans to stay afloat. Their family home had a second mortgage taken out 3 years ago, with payments that were frequently late. There were multiple credit cards maxed to their limits, and several personal loans from what Martin delicately termed non-traditional lenders, the kind that charge exorbitant interest rates and employ aggressive collection methods. But most disturbing was the pattern Martin uncovered regarding both of Alan's children. Before Brian met Jessica, Alan had pushed both children toward relationships with partners from wealthy families. Amanda, Brian's sister, had been engaged to the son of a local car dealership owner, a match heavily encouraged by Alan. That engagement had ended suddenly about 2 years ago, with the ex-fiance's family filing a police report alleging that Alan had borrowed $50,000 for a business investment opportunity that never materialized. There was evidence suggesting Alan had been counting on Jessica's presumed inheritance for some time. Martin found loan applications where Alan had listed anticipated family investment as a future asset. One lender had notes in their file referring to conversations where Alan mentioned his son's fiancée came from a construction fortune. Most shocking of all, Martin discovered Alan had a gambling problem that had grown worse over the years. Regular trips to casinos in neighboring states online, poker accounts, sports betting, all contributing to a financial hole that kept getting deeper. Based on Martin's research, Alan owed money to people who wouldn't be satisfied with late payments or installment plans. The picture became clear. Alan wasn't just hopeful that Jessica might have family money. He was desperately counting on it to save himself from dangerous debts. Meanwhile, Jessica and Brian had reconciled, but their relationship remained strained. Brian had apologized profusely for doubting Jessica, but the damage was done. They were walking on eggshells around the topic of money, and Brian's parents continued to make comments and suggestions that undermined their marriage. After careful consideration, I invited Brian to meet me for coffee, just the two of us. He seemed nervous when he arrived, likely expecting a lecture about how he had treated Jessica. Instead, I took a deep breath and placed Martin's folder on the table between us. Brian, before you look at this, I want you to know that I care about you, and I believe you love my daughter for who she is. His face showed confusion as I continued. But there are things about your family situation you might not be fully aware of, things that are affecting your marriage. I had a professional look into some concerns I had. Brian's face paled as he reviewed the documents. The color drained further as he flipped through bank statements, loan applications, and the detailed timeline of his father's gambling activities. I had no idea it was this bad, he whispered. I knew Dad had some financial troubles, but this... He looked up at me devastated. The debts to those people. Those aren't normal creditors. No, they're not, I agreed gently. And that's why the pressure on you and Jessica has been so intense. Brian's next admission broke my heart. Dad started pushing me toward Jessica as soon as he learned who her father was. He did research on Thomas's construction business, told me what a good match it would be. He ran a hand through his hair in distress. I already loved her, by then had been seeing her for months, but he kept emphasizing how important it was to secure the relationship quickly. Did you propose because of that pressure? I asked, dreading the answer. No, Brian said firmly, meeting my eyes. I proposed because I love Jessica more than anything. But Dad did push for a shorter engagement, kept talking about joining the families as soon as possible. He looked down at the documents again. Now I understand why. The pain in his eyes was genuine, and I believed him when he said his love for Jessica was real. But he had been caught in his father's web of financial desperation, a pawn in a game he hadn't known was being played. What do I do? Brian asked, his voice small. If I tell Jessica about this, she'll never want to see my family again. If I don't, Dad will keep pressuring us about money until he drives us apart. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. We need to address this together, all of us. Your parents need help, not more secrets. I arranged a meeting at my home with Jessica, Brian, Alan, and Diane. I told them it was to clear the air about family finances once and for all. The tension was palpable as we gathered in my living room, everyone perched on the edges of their seats like birds ready to take flight at the first sign of danger. Thank you all for coming, I began calmly. I think we need to have an honest conversation about the expectations and assumptions that have been affecting our families. Alan immediately leaned forward. I couldn't agree more, Eileen. Transparency is all we've been asking for. You're right about transparency, Alan, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. So, let's start with your gambling debts, the second mortgage on your house, and the money you owe to those loan sharks in Atlantic City. The color drained from his face. Diane gasped softly beside him. Jessica looked confused while Brian stared at his hands, unable to meet his father's eyes. I don't know what you're talking about, Alan blustered, but his voice lacked conviction. I slid a copy of Martin's report across the coffee table. I think you do. I also think you've been pressuring Jessica and Brian about non-existent family money because you're desperate to solve problems of your own making. Diane picked up the report with trembling hands, her eyes widening as she scanned the contents. Alan, what is this $50,000 to Masterplay Casino, a loan from someone named Vince, with 20% weekly interest? Alan's defense crumbled quickly. Initially blustering and defensive, he finally broke down when confronted with the detailed evidence of his activities. It started small, he admitted, voice cracking. A few bets here and there after work. Then a weekend in Atlantic City where I got lucky, walked away $5,000 ahead. I thought I'd found a way to solve our money problems. As his story poured out, the picture became clearer. Years of gambling losses covered up with loans, business expansions funded with credit he couldn't afford, all built on the hope that one big win would set everything right. When Brian started dating Jessica, Alan had seen it as that big win, access to what he presumed was the Williams construction fortune. When I researched your husband's business, Eileen, I saw the projects he built. Those downtown office towers, the riverfront development. Those are $100 million projects, I assumed. You assumed wrong, I said firmly, but not unkindly. Thomas and I worked hard, lived within our means, and yes, the business was successful. But your assumptions about our wealth and your entitlement to it have nearly destroyed your son's marriage. Diane was openly crying now. I knew about some of the gambling, but not the extent, not the dangerous people. She turned to Jessica with pleading eyes. I never meant for this to affect you and Brian. I thought if Alan could just get the business on solid footing, everything would be fine. Brian, who had remained silent, finally stood up. For perhaps the first time in his life, he faced his father not as a dutiful son, but as a man protecting his own family. Dad, this ends today, he said, voice firm despite the emotion in his eyes. You need help. Real help for the gambling financial counseling, maybe bankruptcy protection. But you need to leave Jessica and me out of your financial plans. We're not your solution. Alan seemed to deflate before our eyes. The weight of his secrets finally lifted, but leaving him exposed and vulnerable. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. The business is overextended, the house is underwater, and some of these people, they don't take no for an answer. This was the moment of truth, the moment where I had to decide how much to reveal about my own financial situation. Jessica caught my eye, giving me a small nod of permission. She understood what I was considering. "I have resources that can help," I said, carefully measuring each word. "Not because of any obligation, but because you're family now, and families support each other through difficult times. But my help comes with conditions." I outlined my terms clearly. Alan would enter treatment for gambling addiction immediately. The family would work with a financial counselor of my choosing to restructure their debts and create a sustainable business model. Most importantly, they would respect Jessica and Brian's marriage and financial independence going forward. "I'm not going to tell you exactly what I have or don't have," I explained. "That's private, and frankly, it's not relevant to solving the immediate problems. What matters is that I can help Alan address his dangerous debts and get the professional help he needs." There were tears, recriminations, and painful admissions that evening. Diane confessed to enabling Alan's behavior out of fear. Alan acknowledged using his children as pawns in his financial schemes. Brian apologized to Jessica for ever doubting her. By the time everyone left, we had a plan. Not an easy one, but a path forward. In the days that followed, I worked with my financial advisors to establish a structured assistance program for Alan. I paid off his high-interest, dangerous debts directly with no money passing through his hands. I connected him with a respected gambling addiction counselor and a business consultant who specialized in small business turnarounds. The process wasn't smooth. Alan resisted parts of the recovery program, particularly the financial oversight. Diane struggled with her codependent patterns, but with firm boundaries and consistent support, small improvements began to appear. 6 months after our confrontation, Alan was 90 days clean from gambling and attending weekly support meetings. With professional management help, his plumbing business was operating on sound financial principles for perhaps the first time. The dangerous debts were cleared, though years of financial rebuilding lay ahead. Jessica and Brian had worked through their trust issues with the help of marriage counseling. They moved into a modest house in a nice neighborhood, one they could afford on their combined salaries, with just a small gift from me that any mother might provide to help with a down payment. Most importantly, the dynamic between our families had transformed. The desperate fixation on money had been replaced with more authentic connections. Sunday dinners were about sharing news and enjoying each other's company, not probing for financial information or making veiled requests. On their 1-year anniversary, I invited Jessica and Brian to my home for a special dinner. After dessert, I handed them an envelope. "There's something I want to share with you both now that your marriage has weathered its first challenge and emerged stronger." Inside was a summary of my actual inheritance from Thomas, the full $43 million with details of the investment accounts, property holdings, and business interests. Their shock was everything I had anticipated a year earlier. Jessica's jaw dropped as she processed the figures before her. Brian looked stunned, then let out a small, incredulous laugh. "All this time," Jessica whispered, "Dad left you this much, and you never said anything." "I wanted you to build your marriage on love and shared values, not money," I explained. "And given what we now know about Alan's financial situation, can you imagine what might have happened if this information had come out during your engagement?" Brian shook his head slowly. "My father would have seen it as the answer to all his problems. He would have pushed even harder for quick access to funds. Our marriage wouldn't have stood a chance." "Exactly," I said. "Money doesn't just reveal character. Sometimes it warps it. I needed to know that your foundation was solid before introducing this complication." "So, what happens now?" Jessica asked, still processing the revelation. "Nothing changes with your day-to-day lives," I assured them. "You'll continue building your careers, living within your means, making your own choices. But I wanted you to know the truth, and to include you in some decisions I've been making. I explained how I had been using portions of the inheritance for philanthropy, funding scholarships for first-generation college students, supporting construction training programs in underserved communities, contributing to addiction recovery centers, like the one helping Alan. I'd like you both to be involved in these efforts if you want to be, I told them. Not because the money will be yours someday, though of course it will, but because giving back thoughtfully is a skill best learned through practice. That evening marked a new chapter in our family story. Jessica and Brian continued living modestly, but became involved in our family's giving initiatives. Alan maintained his recovery, rebuilding his business properly, and eventually repaying a portion of what I had covered for his debts. Not because I asked, but because it was important for his self-respect. The journey taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's found in relationships built on trust and authenticity. It's measured in the wisdom to know when silence protects and when truth heals. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children isn't financial security or material advantages. It's the space to find their own way to build relationships unencumbered by either wealth or expectations. By keeping quiet about my inheritance when my daughter got married, I gave her the chance to be loved for herself and to discover her own strength when challenges arose. I often wonder what Thomas would think of how I handled everything. I like to believe he would be proud of the choices I made to protect our daughter, help her in-laws, and eventually share our blessing in ways that strengthen, rather than undermine, family bonds. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have revealed your wealth from the beginning, or kept it quiet like I did? Leave a comment below with your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. And if you know someone who might benefit from this lesson about money, family, and trust, please share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the truest wealth is wisdom, to know when to speak and when to remain silent.